is WVVA in Focus, a weekly program about important issues and events in the two Virginias.
Good morning and welcome to this edition of In Focus. I'm your host, Melinda Zosh. It's the last day of February and WVVA has been bringing you stories this month of civil rights icons for Black History Month. Joining us today, we have two guests to elaborate on Black History Month. Frederick Brown, pastor at the Faith Center Church in Bluefield, West Virginia, and also Dr. Louis Brogdon, a professor and author. He works at Bluefield College and the Baptist Seminary of Kentucky. So I want to thank our guests for joining us. And I guess, Dr. Brogdon, I'll start with you. You're joining us via Zoom from Louisville, Kentucky. Why is it important to celebrate Black History Month?
Well, it's important because so much of what gets taught in public schools does not address the history and the contributions of African Americans. One study was done and found that only about 9% of what is taught in public schools addresses the Black experience. And so when you think, okay, the African American community, we're about 13.4% of the US population. And man, we've made many, many wonderful contributions to this country. We have played an integral part in our history. And so it's important. Black History Month is so important because it brings these contributions, these people, and these stories to light. And so it's a way to really honor the parts of American history that have been historically omitted in this country.
All right, and Bishop Brown, you're joining us via Zoom from Charlotte, North Carolina. Again, I want to thank our guests for being here. Do you want to elaborate on what Dr. Brogdon just said about the importance of celebrating Black History Month?
Yes, I think Dr. Brogdon is spot on as he talks about how the history of African Americans or Blacks has not been known very much in our public institutions. And so it's vital and important that this information is consistently exposed so that we can increase in our learning and our knowledge so that we can be a diverse nation. I like what Carter G. Woodson said. He made a very important statement, and he said, if a race has no history, it has no worthwhile tradition. It becomes a negligible factor in the thought of the world, and it stands in danger of being exterminated. And so one of the things that we are endeavoring to do is to make sure that the history of African American people is not exterminated and not just kept in the lost files forever.
Yeah, good point, absolutely. And Dr. Brogdon, what is the origin of Black History Month? Can you elaborate on its origins for those who may be unfamiliar with how this even came about?
Oh, absolutely, I'd love to. Well, you could trace the origins back to about 1915, and there was a Harvard-trained historian named Carter G. Woodson, who also worked with a very prominent minister, Reverend Moreland, and they started this historical society that tried to celebrate the life and the history of African Americans. And so it started as what was called Negro History Week, and it has just continued to gain momentum, so much so that ever since 1976, every administration has recognized the month of February as Black History Month as a way to celebrate the contributions of African Americans and then to lift up the important role African Americans have played in our history. And again, I just want to say it's so important because it helps everyone to better understand their neighbors. And so, let's say, for example, if you're a Christian, the great commandment is to love God and to love your neighbor. What helps you to love your neighbor is to understand a little bit more about them and about their history. And it only helps us to be a better community and a better nation. So I love the fact that we get a month. Now, honestly, what we really need to do is to change our curriculum and to make our curricula much more diverse so that it reflects the diversity of the nation. But in the meantime, we're thankful that we have Black History Month to kind of spend some time talking about what doesn't get talked about in schools.
And Bishop Brown, I'll ask you this question first, but some would argue that there should be a White History Month. So can you explain why Black History Month exists, and what would you say to the folks who do push for a White History Month?
Well, that's a loaded statement, and that's a statement that we've been hearing for many, many years. Why is there a Black History Month and not a White History Month? For me, the answer is very simple. In the United States of America, every month is White History Month.
Yes.
And in saying that, what I'm actually trying to say, I'll just say it that way, what I'm trying to say is not to be offensive, but to understand that white history is what we have always known. It's Black history that people have no knowledge of. And so when I'm making a statement and saying, hey, every month is White History Month, that's what we've been taught ever since we were in Head Start all the way through postgraduate studies. We have always been, indoctrinated with all of the white history, but we don't have that in Black culture, and we don't have it in our societies, in our communities, to where people really take time to understand Black culture, to bring us to a place of diversity that we believe that this nation represents. And if we're going to talk about, church, as Dr. Brogdon has mentioned, what we certainly believe heaven looks like.
And Dr. Brogdon, can you also elaborate just on what Bishop Brown was touching on? What would you say to the folks who seem to be out there pushing for a White History Month?
Well, the first thing I'll say is it's an absurd statement, and it's insensitive as well, because growing up in school, all we study, we study the history and the contributions of European Americans, of white Americans. It's what we call a standard education in the United States of America. And I'm going to tell you, I was educated in the Southwest Virginia region, and I never read a book written by a Black person. First time I read a book written by a Black person was when I was pursuing my master's degree in the city of Louisville, Kentucky. Now, if our curriculum was diverse, I should have at least, read a couple of books by African Americans. So not only are we not reading books by Black people, Black issues aren't in the curriculum, and I can count on one hand how many Black teachers I had. And so white culture is what is normative, and that's fine, but curricula and education needs to reflect everyone's experience and everyone's history. And if we care about each other, we want to understand each other better, then we have to understand how we got here. And to do that, we have to diversify our history.
Yeah, absolutely. We have so much more to talk about, and I do want to mention that Dr. Brogdon created a documentary about the 400-year anniversary of when the first slaves arrived to our shores from Africa. I do want to address that when we get back. We have much more to talk about. Stay with us. We'll be right back after this quick break. Good morning once again, everyone. Welcome back to this edition of In Focus. This morning, we're talking all about Black History Month. I'd like to welcome back our guests. First, I want to start back with Dr. Brogdon. And Dr. Brogdon, you created a documentary about the 400-year anniversary of the first slaves arriving from Africa to the shores of Virginia. Can you share with our viewers a bit about that documentary, especially for those who are unfamiliar with it?
I'll be glad to. The documentary is called Slavery in Black and White. And it basically begins with an experience I had where I made a trip to Jamestown, stood on the James River, stood in the very place where the first 20 Africans landed here in the state of Virginia in 1619. And there were three major Baptist denominations that spent about 3 years between 2017 leading up to 2019. Two African-American Baptist convention and one predominantly white Baptist convention. And we gathered together in what we called the Angela Project. And Angela was one of the 20 enslaved Africans who landed on the shores in Jamestown, Virginia. And you know what happens. Basically, you have 20 debt slaves land here. By the 1660s in Virginia, we're already moving from debt slavery to chattel slavery. And it just sets the trajectory for a very, very painful and a devastating history in America, where you have about 246 years of slavery, another 103 years of neo-slavery called Jim Crow segregation. And so what you had was three Baptist bodies getting together to give an honest reckoning of the history. And so what I do is I spend time talking with leaders in both the Black and the white community, exploring ways in which they try to correct and address this history in their churches and in their communities. And so if you go to my YouTube channel, Just put Lewis Brogdon in YouTube, and I've got the documentary is right there. It's called Slavery in Black and White, and I think I think you're going to learn a lot about that, and you're going to meet some exciting people who can really be a model for things that you can do in your own community.
All right, thank you for sharing that information with us, Dr. Brogdon. And I'd like to bring back Bishop Brown in just a minute. But Bishop Brown, you've been the pastor at the Faith Center in Bluefield, West Virginia for more than 25 years now. So what have you been teaching your congregation about Black History Month all these years, and especially now in light of the political divide that we've seen just growing in this country?
So actually, our church we'll be celebrating 27 years starting in the month of May, which we're very excited about. And over the course of the years, I've always been very, very active doing Black History Month in terms of our local church, from things as having conferences and seminars to forums to discuss diversity. I've had soul food feast at the church. We have had a little bit of everything, plays, skits, all different types of things, just in an effort to educate people. Again, the word I'm always going to use is the word diversification, or to talk about diversity. That is my heart, that's my desire, and that's my goal. And what I have emphasized to my church during Black History Month is never a pro-Black message. It's always a message to try to even the divide and bring us to a place, or to conquer the divide and bring us to a place where we understand that we are equal people of all colors, nationalities, and races. And so we've been very active with that for the last 27 years.
Congratulations on that for 27 years. And another question I'd like to ask both of our guests. I'll start, I guess, first with Bishop Brown, but some have argued that when you bring up certain parts of Black history, for example, George Stinney, he was a 14-year-old Black teenager. He was put to death by the electric chair, and he was the youngest person in modern history to have that happen. And some would argue that this is stirring the pot, and it seems like parts of Black history that are painful but true, including about Stinney and also lynchings, the KKK committing atrocities and murdering Black people. What would you say an argument to the folks who think that certain parts of Black history shouldn't be mentioned? Bishop Brown?
Well, as you know, I'm always accused of stirring the pot, and actually, they're kind of right. I am stirring the pot, and I want to stir it until we get everything cooked up so that we can see what we're actually dealing with in this nation. And so I am going to stir the pot. When I hear statements like, well, there are certain parts of Black history that should be omitted, here's what I have come to understand with people. And again, I'm never trying to be offensive. I just want to try to present the facts as much as I can. When you're in a situation of the dominant race in America, you are never going to see, without properly being educated and enlightened, you are never going to see the injustices and all of the things that we deal with systemically in this nation, because it's not directly affecting you. It's not directly affecting your children. And so, of course, anytime we bring up some of the painful moments of Black history, it's troublesome and bothersome to people who still want to just ignore all of the issues and things that we are dealing with in what we refer to as the United States of America, which actually has become the divided states of America. And so it's important for us to understand that, of course, we have to deal with the tough issues. We have to have the hard conversations. And until we are able to do that, we will continue to just dance around all of the real issues that are affecting us and never bring people together. And my heart is to bring people together. And so I'm going to keep stirring the pot, and I'm going to stir it until we cook it up real good. And once we get everything cooked up real good, then we'll see what floats to the top so that it can be removed and we can get down and have a great meal.
Right, and as you said, Bishop Brown, you're going to keep educating and sharing the facts, and that's the key. And Dr. Brogdon, would you like to jump in here and add to what Bishop Brown was just talking about?
Yeah, briefly. A lot of people, they're so hesitant to speak the truth. And one of the reasons they are is because, of course, they don't know their history. If it wasn't for people who were, quote unquote, agitators, people who were protesting injustice, we would still be enslaved Africans in this country. But there was a movement called the abolitionist movement, and people started speaking out against the system of slavery. And what happened? Eventually, that changed. We celebrate Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. today. We celebrate the civil rights movement. But at the time, most Americans did not disagree with what Dr. King was doing. And this is why I have so much respect for people like Bishop Brown, who have what's called moral courage. You know, the easy thing to do during times of controversy is to be silent. But if you're silent, number one, nothing ever changes. And number two, you're not speaking out because people are suffering. And if you care about human suffering, if you care about your neighbor, then sometimes we do have to have hard conversations if things are being done to your neighbor that are painful, because the only way we're going to change them is if we bring these things to light. And so in the African American church tradition, you know, we have a tradition where, you know, we're going to kick against systems that's producing suffering because we feel God doesn't want anyone suffering.
All right, Dr. Brogdon, thank you for sharing that as well. And I'm going to bring Bishop Brown back in on this next question, but the Black Lives Matter movement, as you all know, it was in the headlines a lot last year. So Bishop Brown, how do you feel this movement is going to shape Black history and also American history?
Well, I think the Black Lives Movement has done a lot of good. Of course, anytime there are movements promoting things in this nation along the lines of standing against social and racial injustice and police brutality, it's always going to be scrutinized. And often it's going to be scrutinized because of people that just do not understand the real purpose of the movement. Black Lives Matter has already changed the trajectory of, I believe, Black Americans in terms of how they are now going to stand and how they are going to fight the systemic racism and things that we deal with in this nation. I don't care whether we agree on all of the things, all of the beliefs and all of the statements from Black Lives Matter. We may not agree on everything, and I certainly don't agree in everything that they project. But I do believe that what they are doing is they are educating people, and they are finally bringing people together and uniting people that are Black and white and Asian and from all different types of economic systems and sources, all the way down to just blending people together that are rising up and saying, we are no longer going to just sit back and allow this stuff to continue here in the United States of America. We believe that everybody has a right to be one. The Constitution says we have a right to be one. And so I believe the BLM movement has already significantly shifted how we are going to see Blacks and whites and other nationalities of people rising up now and saying enough is enough.
All right, gentlemen, we do have to take a quick break. Stay with us. We have much more to talk about right after this. Good morning. Welcome back to this edition of In Focus. This morning we're talking all about Black History Month as it wraps up, but there's still quite a bit to learn. I'd like to bring back in our guest, Dr. Louis Brogdon. He has taught a lot about Martin Luther King Jr. So Dr. Brogdon, can you talk to us a little bit about the importance of Dr. King and what you'd like to share with your students about him?
Well, Dr. King is not only a great American, but one of the great African-American leaders. You know, he's very prominently, widely known for, you know, his leadership in the civil rights movement. But a lot of people don't really understand what King really stood for. It upsets me how, you know, we sort of take quotes from Dr. King and throw them around so that people can, you know, make themselves look a certain way. And they may quote something from Dr. King, but they don't understand where the writing came from, where the speech was, what was going on in the 50s and the 60s. And so this is why I'm so passionate about Dr. King, because Dr. King led a movement that changed the world. But in those final years, he was very unpopular. And so the fact that Dr. King is so loved today, but was so unpopular and assassinated on April the 4th, 1968, we need an honest reckoning about really what did Dr. King stand for? Why was he so unpopular? Because I believe had we listened to Dr. King in 67 and 68, we will not have had we wouldn't have had the riots and the protests that we had over the summer. We wouldn't have the problems with inequities in wealth, in policing, and in sentencing that we have today. And so Dr. King saw America's potential, and America had a wonderful opportunity to change. And it didn't take Dr. King up on that opportunity, but many of us who love him and respect him, we're continuing to do that work today.
All right, and I'd like to ask Bishop Brown this next question, but Bishop Brown, what other historical figures or people do you think are important to the shaping of Black history and American history? I know we hear a lot about figures like Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman and such, but are there any other figures that you feel are important to the shaping of American history?
Well, I think, of course, the people that you mentioned, but of course, and it's very difficult for people to even listen to certain people like Malcolm X or even certain people like Louis Farrakhan and multiple people that are significant voices that are controversial in many facets of dialogue, but yet still have a lot of substance and have addressed major issues that we deal with in America. Well, you can go back and just look at all different types of the civil rights leaders, whether you're talking about in more modern times, the Jesse Jacksons and the Al Sharptons, and people that have continually stood and have fought for the rights of Black people in this nation. I believe that they should be included in our history because these guys have legacy. They have given major sacrifice toward the common cause of seeing Black people be able to rise in this nation. And so I believe that it's so important and valuable for us to go back and just find all of the historical people that we can find that have implemented change, that have stood for change, that have walked with us across picket lines, people that have walked across bridges with us, all of those different types of things. We're looking at congressmen and senators now that are now passing off of the scene, and so it's important for us to honor those individuals that can stand with us or that have stood with us and continuing to stand with us for this cause.
And Bishop Brown, you also use your Facebook and Facebook Live features a lot to share your thoughts on various topics. Like you said, you like to stir the pot, as some would see it that way. Some would see it as education. But tell us more about how you've used that to reach a wider audience than beyond Bluefield. And also more recently, you posted about Bluefield College athletes choosing to kneel during the recent game. So how has social media helped you get your message across to an even wider audience?
Well, I think we have to use the platforms that are available to us and that we're privy to. And so social media is the venue in which I'm able to reach not only the United States, but I'm also able to engage people from all around the world, which is vital and important to me because once again, that creates diversity and that creates dialogue and gets us thinking and operating and learning from one another's cultures and all of those types of things that we should be embracing here in the United States. So of course, I have a very large following on Facebook. I max out my numbers, and then I have to go back and start deleting and adding and all of those types of things. So I have a very large base and I have a very large following. And I think it's because people trust me. I think people trust my character. They trust my integrity. And I think at the end of the day, people that really know me and really embrace my teachings and, my quote unquote stirring the pot, that it's never divisive. It's not to try to separate us or, as I said earlier, to preach a pro-Black message as much as it is to let's just understand that diversity is vital and important. We're all one. And so what greater way to do that than using a stream like Facebook or Instagram or any of the other outlets that we have to be able to touch people. Again, I'm touching and reaching people all across the globe. I get feedback from Africa, Australia, Ireland, New Zealand, you name it. I'm getting a lot of feedback from people. As it relates to the Bluefield College situation, that has gained a lot of national attention, and some of it was my platform. I did a live where I spoke out against what was happening at Bluefield College, and I continue to fight for the student athletes at Bluefield College. I believe that they need a voice and someone to speak on their behalf that's not just internal within the institution. I believe it's important and vital for us to fight together and to make sure that these students have rights.
All right, we have about 30 seconds, about 45 seconds left. Quickly, Dr. Brogdon, any concluding thoughts on Black History Month?
Again, I want to go back to one of the fundamental basic teachings of Jesus Christ. He reminded the rich young ruler about the great commandment being to love God and to love your neighbor. And if we're going to paint and walk a different path in America, we're going to have to learn how to love our neighbors better than we have done in our history. And one of the things that's going to help us to do that is to learn each other's story, to learn each other's history, to show respect and compassion. And we can solve some problems that way.
All right.
Thank you for the opportunity to share.
Oh, thank you so much, Dr. Brogdon, for joining us. You're a familiar face here on WVVA, as is Bishop Brown. We always appreciate these two sharing their thoughts. Thank you so much. And if you at home have any ideas for an In Focus segment, you can send me an email. That's mzosh@wvva.com, mzosh@wvva.com. The show is about people and events in the two Virginias. So again, if you have any story ideas, if you'd like to be featured on the show, please send me an email. I'm looking forward to hearing from you. Well, that does it for this edition of In Focus. As always, we'll see you again right here next Sunday. Have a great day.